Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, our guest is Ashton Snook. Ash is an award winning customer experience and user experience designer. He is currently head of product design and UX at Vodafone Smart Tech and Crush. We're excited to have him on the show, talk more about design thinking, the role of product design in digital transformation. Ash, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me on the show.
Perfect. So, Ashton, can you share a bit of your background and what roles? Obviously, you've got a few things under your belt. Maybe start. Why don't you give us a bit of a background?
Of course, yeah. So I've had the fortune, and depends how you read my CV, of bouncing around a good few companies. I trained classically, I suppose, as a graphic designer, but was very drawn to trying to understand how to build products, particularly mobile applications, and found myself working very early on in a great startup in Shoreditch, London. Whilst I was at university, so I was balancing classes, whilst trying to design products with this, very small, lean team, which was super exciting. And I bounced around the scene for a couple of startups, doing a little consultancy on the side of that, and then went agency side for a couple of years, and was fortunate to work with great clients like Santander, FIFA, Eurasian Bank, and on a number of products, which was thrilling. And then decided to go product side, and that main driver for me was to figure out how I could spend more time connecting with the people who would use the product. In a startup world, we didn't necessarily have the budgets, or I think the structure or the maturity to spend as much time researching and learning. The agency side, the agencies that I were part of, at least, it was very focused on serving the client. That client was the person paying the bills, not necessarily the end user. And so the way that I could see myself growing and getting more, closer, connected to the customer, was to go product side. And I joined ASOS and was fortunate enough to be there through the redesign of the application, which was a phenomenal process. And over the last couple of years, I bounced around into e-commerce, working for Tesco, a big grocer here in the UK, and high-end fashion with Farfetch, which is a big international in that sector, before settling into my most passionate role prior to this one, which was over at Hive, which is the UK's one of the UK's leading smart home companies. And now I'm at Vodafone Smart Tech, where we're developing a range of new products. Vodafone Smart Tech Crvsh has just been launched this year, and we're just on the verge of launching something very exciting for the Christmas period. So it's quite a colourful background, startup, agency, and the last few years in product.
That's great. Very diverse indeed. I'd agree. So with that sort of an experience, working with different people, different types of organizations and companies, can you elaborate a bit on design thinking and what does it mean to people within these different types of organizations?
Yeah, so I think that the very interesting element of design thinking is it's still relatively unknown in a lot of organizations. I joke with peers of mine that design thinking is quote unquote just thinking, but I feel what IDEO, Tim Brown, and Mr. Kelly came up with there was a great way to package and sell the concept,
right?
Which is really about looking at creative problem solving by speaking with the end user and empathizing with them. So really, it's about putting the people at the heart of the product or your strategy, and very much the same thing in my definition of it. So design thinking is surprisingly unknown. But it is, I would summarize as saying it's about looking at strategic decisions or product decisions, not by looking at the historical data of the past per se, or basing on gut decisions, which can sometimes be dangerous in certain organizations, but to get out there and to connect with the customer, to feel what they feel, to walk in their shoes, and use that to inspire the direction that you take.
Yeah, that's something, as you said, it's a newer concept, especially in bigger companies. It's almost like a trend that started perhaps with startups as they built SaaS products. and they've learned that really well. Speaking to the having customer centric focus, right, on what they're developing and building. And that thinking needs to also be part of the strategy that you develop a digital strategy or a transformation strategy in mid-size or bigger organizations as well. Completely agreed. So, speaking in the realm of digital transformation, right? That's where, you see digital products, digital platforms, capabilities that are being built in these mid-size as well as bigger companies, um, enterprise-wide, right? What would you say is the role of digital leadership in such in digital transformation?
Great question. So again, it depends on your definition of leadership and digital transformation. But for me, the way that I like to approach leadership and the people that I'm fortunate enough to work with at Smart Tech, I see the role of the leader in that context about still given an element of direction and being able to make a decision on something that I think believe has to remain, but they're really about unlocking the potential of others to enable those decisions. And when we think about digital transformation and applying design thinking to it, it's about bringing together different perspectives and skill sets, still with a leadership team that can make decisions, but are very open to and champion the sense of we need to empower our people to bring the information up to us. And it's somewhere that you strike that happy medium of seasoned experience and on the ground troops, as it were, connecting, whether that is with a different type of customer, a consumer or a business, feeding the needs up so you get the benefits of both.
Yep. And we're talking a little bit about culture as part of that as well, right? How do you bring in that culture of design? And this kind of is also seen as a research task by bigger companies, and they're struggling to see, okay, what's the cost benefit to what's the ROI on this effort, right?
Yeah.
This person's going to come in and talk to our customers and users and do all these research. How do you bring in that culture, and how, maybe I'll start there. Maybe that's the first question.
Yeah. So for me, the culture of design is the culture of people.
Right.
And that's when as you referenced me before, my belief is design strategy starts and ends with people, and that applies to every element of the organization. Design is by definition to have a plan. When we apply design thinking, it's about bringing different perspectives to empathize and understand needs and behavior. And so I think it has to start with recognizing that any organization is built of people, with all of our imperfections and all of our brilliances. Uh, the way that I've seen change in various companies is to simply open up the conversation in a way that recognizes that there are challenges from different perspectives. The marketing team may not exactly have the exact aligned, OKRs with technology, and the same maybe with commercial.
Right.
The goal is to try and bring those people together to see the synergies and then to open up a conversation around putting people at the heart of the conversation. And that's where the change starts to drive.
Got it. Yeah, and kind of going back to the second part of that question, right? So you're talking about the culture of change. How do you get the buy-in from top leadership on from an ROI perspective? How does a CIO or a CTO, associate ROI on these type of initiatives like research as well as design, building this design thinking culture?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge for a lot of teams, and I think it's a really key question for us to answer. My experience has been a culmination of bringing together, for lack of a better term, industry insight. There are numerous companies who have put design and research and people at the heart of their decision making for a number of years.
Hmm.
The big four in technology scream of doing this. Apple is well known for its design quality,
Right.
and therefore we have the most financially stable, successful company to date that puts design in the context. That gives us a good reference point. I think beyond that, it's about unpacking the different methodologies that allow us to look at the metrics that matter to certain individuals with different backgrounds in the organization. And you can't escape ROI, you cannot escape the KPIs that are important from a financial perspective.
Mhm.
So what we've tried to do over the last couple of years, both in my current team and in previous teams, has been to understand what the needs are of the organization and find ways to interconnect those back to the customer. So we're laddering back up and down, and making sure that we can reference design to success from a financial level. Whether that's engagement, whether it is conversion. It's about articulating the user needs and marrying that up with the business. So it's a reference point out there, and then bringing that methodology in and demonstrating that design and research can in fact deliver on those business objectives.
Got it. We should, at a high level, what might those KPIs look like if you were to talk about them?
So one glorious element is that empathy is being seen in companies. The potential debate around that is that's typically championed by most organizations that I can see, at least in the UK, by measuring NPS, so the Net Promoter Score. It gives a sense of how people feel about the products, how they would rate it, of course. Now, what I've been trying to do for the last few years is work with the team to dial up that and look at different ways to measure sentiment, satisfaction. We've been playing with the idea of building on something that Don Norman proposed, which is this idea of looking at the visceral, behavioural, and the reflective elements, and being able to communicate that back to the board or the senior leadership team, alongside almost having the quick wins. Design thinking allows us to leverage process methodologies to optimize the workflow. So as opposed to spending 6 months working on an idea to find out if it's good or bad, we might do that in, say, 6 weeks or 6 days. And I think that's what's really exciting, because efficiency, of course, is well understood as being a business benefit.
Got it.
So it's certainly different elements that fall into that picture.
So we've talked about the why of design, so far with these questions, and then I'd like to get into the how, of how do we implement this within an organization. That's going to be my next set of questions. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about that.
Sounds great. Cheers, David.
I am interrupting this engaging conversation to tell you about ModeStack, a digital product agency that makes this podcast possible. Struggling with staff and not sure how to get ahead? Keep hearing about the cloud and how it can change your team? Have an application that you invested lots of money and haven't seen growth? These are all questions that our team has worked on answering for years. Learn more at themodestack.com. Let's get back to the show.
Welcome back. All right, so we're going to continue with some questions around the how of, more on the implementation side of design and UX. So Ash, what are some design frameworks that leaders can tap into to build a UX sensible culture?
What are some frameworks to tap into? Well, again, if we're talking about design thinking, how we can apply that, there isn't on paper, a simpler methodology, I feel, than what IDEO discuss. And you can find that out in many of their books or on their talks by Tim Brown. So, there is the classic, what is now become a classic, at least the 5-step process of empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, and testing. And what that really is saying is that we need to go out there and listen, and you need to learn from people. And I think that happens, from building a product, an application or website, through to understand how you construct a good org chart to get the best out of people. It's about connecting with people and putting them at the heart of the conversation. Defining it obviously is around the opportunity. What is the field or the frame that we want to play in? It's as simple as that, but it often is missed in many organizations that they define clearly what we're going to try and go after. The ideation, of course, is around looking at different ways to bring people together. And I often feel that diverse people, whether it's by technical skills, backgrounds, whether that is, in terms of where they were raised, city by city, country by country, brings a different element to the conversation. And the ideation, we can dive into some methodologies there, but that again is about generating ideas. And I think critically for businesses to work successfully in the 21st century, relatively fast, and then translating those into something that feels tangible. Now that could be for the purpose of an org chart. That could be modeling out some decisions and some concepts on a PDF, a piece of paper, or a presentation. It could be a prototype on a phone for an application, or it could be a physical device made from styrofoam or card. And then testing, getting it back to people so that we can hear and understand how they feel about it, how they use it, if it meets their needs. And then you repeat and rinse that process through and through. The great thing about that process, it feels linear, but in reality, it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversations all the way through.
Right. And some of those steps can be run concurrent, right? Parallelly as well, right? Because they sort of like, there's a feedback mechanism that is built on each of these stages that you're talking about, that provides input to the other.
Exactly. We often make the mistake, and I guess because as humans, we like to have organization, we like to see things run on a linear track.
Right.
But the reality of every company, like humans, which are, of course, the company themselves, have their own priorities, have their own needs, have their own personal lives, and those impacts that.
Right.
And so one of the challenges that you might see with, again, a very popular methodology is design sprints, is that it requires a huge amount of dedication and focus. Now, if you can get everybody who you need to in the room to commit to it, brilliant. But in most organizations, my experiences are it doesn't work by the book. And so it's about extracting the things that can be useful, but get them to work in your own context.
Yep. Yeah. And then that's kind of my, I think design sprints are great. I don't want to say my beef with design sprints, but I think, for lack of a better word, I want to say you can't just get everybody in the same room for a workshop for 1 week, right? It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
However, with the type of framework that you just described, there is more give, but at the same time, we are also making sure everybody's consulted, product owners are identified, and there's a whole structure to product management, right?
Yeah, exactly. I feel as well the design sprints, and not to critique them too heavily, I have found that they work very well if you're a consultancy and a lot of capital has been put up by the senior leadership team because you've invested in it, you want to go for it. If you're an in-house team,
right,
regardless if you're applying that from a technology perspective or design, it can be very tricky. But the key thing there is utilizing methodologies and adapting them for that context. You could do, and I've done it multiple times, run micro design sprints, in 2 or 3 hours,
right,
and that could be the right thing for your company.
Right. So, some of our listeners may not be building products per se. When I say products, digital products, they don't see themselves as a digital product company. Maybe they might be like a loan servicing company or kind of a commercial brokerage company. There are multiple types of companies who offer certain services, but they are seeing themselves as building digital experience or digitally enabling their employees or operations. How would you, I suppose, how would you bring in this kind of a design thinking for such companies? If we were to, I don't want this to be like design companies or design thinking is only for product companies. How can other companies leverage this type of a culture or a thought process?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's design thinking. I think this is the whole intention behind packaging what designers do in a way that could sound more tangible. And I believe that's what Tim Brown and IDEA were trying to champion. Everyone can think like a designer. Really, it's about creative problem solving. So if and maybe the term design thinking creates that stigma and may not help people unlock what the potential that they could do. But it's about stepping back again, regardless if you're building something more abstract like loans or insurance. Start with the why. Start with what we're trying to achieve. Start with understanding who is actually going to benefit from this product, and working through that. That I believe is universal to any organization. Now, I think design thinking could be the stigma that we're creating around that makes people go, oh, which is not the intention of the phrase. It's meant to empower everybody to work through problems creatively. But I think, it normally starts with one or two people getting inspired by a podcast or a talk or by a book, and finding ways they can have those conversations, and finding demonstrations where you can apply that
Mhm.
into companies that don't just deal with what we refer to as a product company.
Got it.
But absolutely, it can apply to, I feel probably every business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what? Maybe this might be a good question that some of our audience can take away. Like, what are some key positions that, whether it's part-time, full-time, that a company should think about to enable this type of a digital thinking or design thinking, I should say?
Yeah. So I would probably be amiss not to say, I think a designer in any company is very important. Now, a lot of people misconstrue a designer should be focusing on graphics or decoration. But when I say a designer, I mean someone who believes absolutely in bringing the customer, the people to the forefront of a conversation, and they can utilize different methodologies to inspire people to think through those frames and look at things with different perspectives. You might also want to have a researcher of some description, depending on what's relevant to you, because again, you need someone who can dedicate themselves and has the right capabilities to objectively speak with individuals or systems or anyone in operations to understand their struggles, the friction points, the opportunities, and play back, to the wider community. So, depending on how you carve out a designer or researcher, I feel those are key roles. But equally, I would see anyone as a product manager, even a project manager, a scrum master, an engineer themselves. There's nothing to stop an individual contributing using some of those methodologies for their own needs.
Got it.
But a designer or researcher doesn't hurt any company.
Right. Right. We also talk about roles such as, product design, product designer, product manager versus product owner. How do you see those roles performing differently? Maybe more product management versus product ownership.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been having this conversation with a few colleagues recently. My conclusion, in a nutshell, is that it varies dramatically between companies. Some companies see product managers or product owners being about the customer champion, as well as making decisions, but they're hands-on in design. Others see it purely as a management role to define, what goes into the roadmap, what do we prioritize, what tickets are written, and how does the developer work through a sprint. Sometimes the designer can be seen as something more graphical, or it can be someone who's bringing every element together. So it is relatively diverse. I would say that a great product person and a great designer have very shared values, probably a very similar skill set, and they are taking a slightly different position. They're almost two sides to the same coin. It's about creating something magical, both bringing a slightly different element, and then inspiring everyone around them to work towards that vision. So I guess I would describe it as a product owner being partly a product designer, partly a product manager. They make decisions, but it's all about empowering people around them. A product designer is about focusing on taking that concept, challenging a product owner as well, but making it tangible, making it into something real. And a product manager is about coordinating people, inspiring them. But I think the management element is about relinquishing some more control in the title. And therefore, it's about coordinating people together, less so around being the authority in everything.
Yep. Almost
It
like
varies so much.
building that culture within the organization, kind of building that mindset, right? Not, yeah, I think mindset is the right word. It's not just culture.
Yeah.
That's great. Where you talked a little bit about podcasts and books, what are some resources that our audience can go find some value when they want to learn more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Envision does a great podcast. I forget the name off the top of my mind, but if you Google Envision podcast, they do a great one with different elements, people internally and some externals. Google Method. Again, a great company, great design methodology and thinking in that organization. Of course, there's IDEO. I've mentioned a couple of times, but of course, design thinking being our main topic, those guys have certainly championed that definition. They do a podcast, and you could sign up to something like IDEO U, which is online training, which I found useful a few years ago, and certainly I would recommend to people.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's a ton of content out there.
Yeah. I'd
Depends how
like
you
to
want to.
link this in our show notes. So perhaps if you want to send me those links later,
Of
um,
course.
when we
Yeah.
publish it, we can link that in our show notes for our viewers. Also, I want to ask you, what are some events that obviously a lot of it is online these days. What are some events that you have participated in the past, perhaps looking forward in the future? What do you plan to attend?
So there is two of my favorite conferences. One I have not got to yet, but I love the theme of it, is Design Matters, which happens in Copenhagen, I believe.
Okay.
I've been planning to get to it for the last 2 years. Last year, not so good. This year, coronavirus, so I wasn't able to go, which is a real shame. But again, design matters. That concept of design is important, and it's about
Right.
helping designers feel like they've got a role to the table and changing some perception.
Mhm.
The other one that I loved and I went to in New York a few years ago was 99U,
Mhm.
which I believe is hosted by Behance. Some
Right.
incredible speakers, some of the best minds, I would say, in our industry from product and design and research, and hugely inspiring talks.
It's awesome. Um, you've got a couple of other ventures. Could you tell us a little bit about Jed.AI and the other? Is it Crvsh? I'd like to
Yeah, I can give
learn
a
more
bit
about.
of definition around those. Absolutely. So let's start with Crvsh. Crvsh is part of Vodafone Smart Tech. It was a company set up in Berlin a couple of years ago, and so what we're doing at the moment is bringing those two studios together to boost up and build this amazing team called Vodafone Smart Tech. So it's one of the same in many ways. Jed.AI is run a startup run by a good friend of mine from back at ASOS, brilliant guy called Jed.AI, and phenomenal guy who's into machine learning and artificial intelligence. It's an amazing creative space where they're always evolving and pushing ideas, and it's really trying to understand what business opportunities could be out there. And what Jed and his team have been doing is applying design thinking methodologies to run experiments on different business models and what might work. But
Got it.
it's always an evolving process. I won't go into too much detail over there, but
No worries.
I can probably link to him, and you can probably get in touch if anyone wants to.
Definitely. Yep. Well, Ash, it's been a pleasure talking with you about design, UX, product ownership, and things like all these topics that are definitely growing and carving out a space within digital transformation overall for big, larger enterprise organizations as well. Thanks for being on the show.
Pleasure, David. Really enjoy the conversation.